Um, Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Phasma YouTube channel. It's been a little while. I apologise for the little hiatus in updates. I've just finished uni and yeah, I need a little bit of time before I carry on creating content. So welcome back. This is part 3 of my series going through my RTP for uni, looking at women in horror films and their kind of relationships with power and family. And in this part, I guess it's part 3 now, I am going kind of back in time a bit. I'm gonna go right back to, oh, I'm not sure what year it was actually. I'm gonna have to speed this up as we Google. 431 BC. We're going that far back. So this is kind of it was under the title, subheading, historically speaking. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Medea, the Greek tragedy, written by Euripides back in ancient Greece. The title of this segment is How Medea Did It First, Villainizing Women Before the Common Era, as it was 431. I don't know if you say 431. I've always said 431 because it sounds, I don't know, it sounds better. Yeah, let's just jump straight into it. So in the past 5 years, there's been a huge surge in folk horror films, especially with Ari Aster dropping the 2019 film Midsummer, with Robert Eggers in 2015 with The Witch, and they're kind of, both films actually gained that kind of elusive certified fresh rating on the online aggregator Rotten Tomatoes. And I find these films really interesting, and it's kind of interesting to see it because horror itself is always aimed to shock. It's always wanting to make you go, ooh, or ooh, and it's always covering these taboo topics and exploring and exposing forbidden themes. And folk horror is not an exception to this at all. Maybe it's slightly less obvious than watching a Saw film or maybe even Miss 45, but it covers these themes and these topics. And it was introduced in the late 60s, so it's quite a recent kind of branch of the genre. And the subgenre itself has fluctuated over time, with counterculture and socio-political agendas. And as a subgenre, folk horror is perhaps the hardest. I find it the hardest to define out of all of them. Having common conventions that include ancient power and overwhelming isolation, the genre covers much more of a feeling than a categorization. And I think this relationship between women and power has always been enigmatic and unsure, but folk horror kind of highlights this ambiguity, especially the one that lies between representation of women and representation of witches. They're different. When you start looking into it, you start seeing the different ways they are presented. In the book Misfits, this is by Sue Short, she quotes that female power and maturity align with moral responsibility and this idea of a maternal future. But this was as an ultimate goal, it was given by patriarchy. It was expectation built by patriarchy, and female power still remains unidentified, especially in film and media texts. And I think there have been odd cases where you've really seen yourself, but otherwise it's very much in neat little boxes, and there has to be certain cues and reasons. And tales as old as Medusa really exemplify this dogma that men need to violently take back and reassert power over this possessed woman. And the satanic wish from history is kind of full of this sexual deviancy, and her evil and corruption is just spread so dark and rooted that the only salvation is to burn out this evil. And this history has enabled witches to transcend the 15th century and witch trials, really, even tracing further from Christianity, further and further, and Satanism to ancient times in Greek literature and legend. She's beyond that. And Circe, Medea, Hecate, and the Grey Sisters, these are all women who have been villainized and portrayed with these monstrous characteristics of greed and hatred for an unspeakably long time. And her desire for destruction, it's capitalized in multiple societies who molded these stereotypes over time. to fit their own beliefs and religions. And what started as oral folktales championing female resourcefulness became really twisted and lost in translation. So these old folktales were spoken around campfires and passed down from generation to generation, and they celebrated women and they celebrated young women, and they warned them of all the dangers of the world. And it's just been lost, and it's been turned and changed into these brightly lit Disney films that don't hold the message anymore. And these stories were taken and adapted by storytellers like the Grimm brothers, who kept mending and ironing the tales they collected so that they would ultimately fit the patriarchal Christian code of the bourgeois reading expectations. Jack Swipe says that. And since the introduction of folklore in the late 60s, there has been a growing ambiguity of these witches' portrayal. And Lucifer may choose her, but oftentimes she's also a victim. And this sympathy in contemporary horror and folk horror suggests this kind of postmodern and post-feminist overview, and it's kind of understanding that not everything is as black and white as it may seem. Rhona Berenstein understands that women as monster is empowering, whilst also recognising that images also signal male anxiety about powerful women. And fiction of women who are villains are almost always manipulative and malicious, and I've said this in my Suspiria video as well. They're snake-like, and they covet their power, especially matriarchies, and it's almost like a dystopian representation of society. It's not normal anymore. It's further, and it's falling. It's horrific. Can't even imagine it. And this anxiety, it's really palpable. It's palpable anxiety, and unsubtle, and can be easily exampled in both contemporary and historical media texts. And this is kind of where Medea comes in. So Medea is a Greek tragedy written by Euripides in 431 BC, and it's possibly the earliest example I can really think of, like in my personal researching, of a powerful woman being demonized that we really have access to text-wise. And Medea gave up everything for her marriage and her children. She killed her own stepbrother. She left her land. She was a foreigner in a land just for the man she fell in love with, and just so that he could be happy, really. And that he was the Greek hero Jason, as in Jason and the Argonauts Jason. And poor Medea is really the choral introduction we have to her character. It's always, oh, poor Medea, oh. And she's continuously built as a sympathetic figure. In the beginning of the tragedy, it's her husband leaves her for a young woman before the play begins. Like, it's this one thing after another. She is the victim. And what I find really interesting is Medea is everything a Greek woman is not. So she is determined to let no one think of her as humble, weak, or passive. And she concocts a plan to kill her husband's lover, and then later the decision to take the life of her own children. And Medea's anguish about these choices is what I find the best part, I guess. So she anguishes, but to making their father suffer, making Jason suffer when she would suffer twice as much, is kind of overlooked after this decision. The chorus calls her a child killer and her presence pollution, but what we get from her monologuing is that she understands the pain she's going to cause herself, but it's worth it to get back at Jason.
No one has ever injured me, but suffered more than I had suffered. Therefore, this final sacrifice I intended glares in my eyes like a lion on a ridge. We still hate, you know, a person nearer than these. More vile, more contemptible, oh my. Oh. I cannot. If it were my hands, I would cut him off. For my eyes, I would gouge him out, but not you. That was madness.
And Maria Warner argues that authentic power lies within a bad woman, and this can really be exampled in this early example of a witch. Medea was a sorceress, which was one of the reasons why she was so marginalised in this Greek community she moved to. And her actions leave a man who is crowned a hero to be left devastated. He was crushed, like when he was old, he was cursed by his wife, like to die alone. She cursed him to die alone and crushed under his own ship's hull. That's how he died, by being crushed by the Argo's hull, which is poetic irony if I ever heard it. And what also is a really good thing to kind of like realize and recognize in her characterization is that poison in itself it's always been like a women's weapon, I guess, especially in Greek times. And as Medea slides further into this rage, into this kind of calculated revenge state, she becomes more aggressive, and she kills her sons with a knife. She stabs them to death, and she just adopts this cool calm as Jason becomes this hysterical one. And there's a real reversal there between the two characters. And this reversal of gender roles it only reinforces this monstrous twist of Medea's presence. As Jason labels her, he says, "You're not a woman, but you're a Tuscan Scylla, but more savage." And Medea manages to kind of go from this sympathetic figure to this aggressive antagonist. And she just takes this power that was held over her and twists it for her own use. And she flies away this is my favourite part, she flies away in a dragon chariot. And she takes the bodies of her sons with her because she's going to be the one to bury them and give them their funeral rites, not Jason. She's taken everything from him, even the chance to say goodbye to his children. And I think what's interesting is the play made her more traditionally masculine in stature and action, as she fell further from this sympathetic visage, we'll go with that. And it samples a theory of Carol J. Clover's, who wrote Men, Women and Chainsaws, that female monsters and female heroes, when they do appear, are masculine in dress and behaviour. And I find what Medea does, and what you still find in, especially in modern horror films or even dramas or thrillers, is this major reversal for the characters, or just this very masculine representation of them. So you watch Halloween and you see Laurie Strode. She is resourceful, and she's the OG final girl, but she's kind of that resourceful. But Laurie is an ambiguous name, and there's a lot about Laurie that's quite masculine, especially compared to her friends and the other women in the cast. And I think this kind of picking these masculine traits for these heroes, as was mentioned in the quote earlier, you kind of, there's no representation of women just being bad and being women whilst being bad. And I feel like you can find it now in more modern texts, but you have to look for it to find it. Thank you so much for staying to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe. Come find us on the blog or the podcast. We're at Phasma Pod. I'm just Phasma, I think, on Spotify, Apple Podcast, not playlist, Apple Podcast. I will put all the links below. Come follow us on Instagram, subscribe, all that jazz. Have a nice day.